everyone, welcome back to Adobe Live. Long time no see. If you're new here, I'm Jack Watson, UI UX designer, illustrator, animator, donut connoisseur, and for pro tips today, we're going to be covering packaging, specifically printing packaging. So if you saw the creative kickoff earlier today, we went over some mock-ups. Today we're going to be looking at actually creating the die lines for some packaging. So I'll be walking you through a project I did recently to show how die lines are structured, as well as some basics around color and some specialty printing tips and tricks specific to packaging. We've gone over printing before in past Adobe live streams, as well as creating a die line, so feel free to check out those replays as well, and also subscribe to the Adobe Live YouTube while you're over there. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in our live chat on YouTube and Behance as I'm going through this, or you can also leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching the replay. All right, so to get started, I do want to preface that every printer is going to have their own specifications. They're going to have ways they prefer to have files set up. We're going to be covering some general commonalities, but make sure that you double check with your printer. Most of them have guides available, but for packaging, specifically like specialty printing or special custom packaging, there's going to be a bit of back and forth between you and the printer to make sure that everything prints properly. So don't be afraid to talk to your printers, I guess, the long and short of it. I have two different die lines open up in Illustrator, so I've got, you'll notice some commonalities between these. So we've got this one and we've got this one. This is a 5-pound coffee bag and a 12-ounce coffee bag. And they're two different styles of bags, and we'll get into that in a minute. But first, I want to zoom in and show you, there's a little key over here. And so this key has a list of all of the elements that are put together in this die line for the printer's reference. So if we zoom in, it's a little bit hard to see. We've got the magenta. The magenta is kind of on the artboard, so that's why it's kind of a little bit more difficult to see. It's blending with the black. So we've got our bleed, we've got our trim, we've got our safe area. Those are all pretty common elements in print. But then we've got two additional elements here. I'm actually going to hide these for a sec so you can just look at the template. We've got a fold, which are these dashed lines, and then we've got a heat seal, which is going to be unique, or, this might be a glue area if you were dealing with something that was glued together. These are heat sealed. So those are areas that are unique to putting together packaging. You can see that we've got a heat seal kind of all the way along this bottom as well. So this is generally how a packaging die line is constructed, and when you send this file off to your printer, you're going to want to send off your file with this template layer removed. That is so that your guides don't get printed with your file. You don't want those guides to be printed on your file. So generally speaking, you'll remove that template layer. I've just hidden it for the time being. But if you are, and a lot of printers will have these templates available if you're working with them with like a standard size. So if it's a standard size box that they create a lot of, they might have a template available for it. But if you're doing fully custom packaging, you're gonna want to send along that template layer, this whole thing as a separate PDF. That way the printer can reference it and knows, like, the measurements and the placement of things. So you'd want to send this along as a separate kind of template, this template as its own PDF to your printer. Okay, so backtracking a bit, I want to go over what these elements are, since we kind of glossed over them a bit. So the bleed is going to be that extended area off of your design that, as you trim to this blue line, you have a little bit of extra, a little bit of a buffer area, so that when you're printing, if anything slips on the press, you're not going to have that white gap or the paper gap in your design. Also, hi, Gus. Sorry, I have to stop and say hi to Gus. Anyways, the safe area, the trim area, is obviously where your paper gets cut. And the safe area is where you're going to want to make sure all of your important elements, like your logos, your copy, things like that, are within. There are some exceptions to this, however. So you'll notice, I want to make sure that my logo is within those safe areas because we don't want any of that stuff to get cut off. But I have a little bit of my design elements going beyond that safe area, and that's okay. In this case, we wanted to have those elements extend off the edges because they needed to line up as the bag wrapped around. So there are some exceptions. You want to make sure that things like your barcodes, any important information about the product, logos, all that stuff should be inside of your saved area. But any design elements, it's fine to have those kind of extend off depending on the circumstances. So in this case, it's for the sake of wrapping it around our design, we let them extend beyond. So there are two elements though that are unique to this design, and that's going to be the fold and the heat seal. So let's take a look at the two different designs. So we've got the flat bottom 12-ounce bags, and we've got a 5-pound gusseted bags. And if we zoom out, there's a little bit of a difference between these two. So on the flat bottom bags, we have individual artboards for each of our elements. And if we take a look at the template, we'll actually see that each of these, hang on, I gotta hide all of my layers, all the colors in one file. You'll notice that these have a trim line that's rounded, and the heat seals are on each individual panel. So this specific design is individual panels that are individually cut and then heat sealed. This design is all one sheet that's cut and glued along the bottom edge. There's a couple reasons for this. One is logistics. So the 5-pound wholesale bags, these are like for wholesale clients or customers. These have less material by not cutting those individual shapes out. And they also, they are a little bit sturdier since they don't have as many heat seals. So we've got more of just like a whole sheet, and then that's trimmed and glued. Versus this, you've got more points of weakness. But in this case, for the 12-ounce, we went with the fancier design because obviously these are customer-facing. They allow for, this style of bag allows for a zipper, which is important for like customers, like individuals who want to like maybe use a little bit of coffee and close them back up. So these are all things that you're thinking about when you're creating custom package. Again, who's the audience? What is the best kind of style of bag that you need to create, and how can you, like, what elements do you need to incorporate? Is it going to be an individual heat seal, panels, or is it going to be more of like a whole cloth gusseted bag style? The gusseted bag can't have zippers on it, so that's something to think about. Okay, so I've thrown a lot of information at you. But just looking at different dielines, you can learn a lot about how packaging is constructed. If we take a look at our Illustrator, the challenge that we created, this was one single rectangle, so we were able to take advantage of Illustrator's built-in bleed settings. When it comes to packaging, those shapes aren't going to fit into perfect rectangles. They're going to be a unique shape, which is why you need to create these sort of special die lines in order to communicate that information to the printer so that they know like what, where things fold, where things are assembled, how everything kind of gets put together. So now that we know how to read a die line, let's talk about color. So our document's in CMYK. We go up here and we look at File, Document Color Mode. We're already in CMYK. We know that CMYK is the color gamut for print, but it's actually more involved than that. So it's setting your document to the right color space is kind of a step in the right direction, but there's a couple things you need to know. CMYK is additive printing, so it's printing using additive color. It's additive color space. Anyways, so anything you add over top will be darker. RGB is subtractive, so it's, creates lighter colors. But knowing that information, anything that you add over top, printing lighter colors is going to be, you're not going to be printing lighter colors over black. This packaging is black, and so we can't just print, I'm going to hide my cheater layer there. Anything I print is going to print darker over that dark, so we can't print our lighter color. We're not going to be printing white over black. We're actually going to be printing black around where we want the paper to show through. So you have to kind of get your head wrapped around that idea that the white in this is actually not white. It's not white ink. It's actually the paper coming through. And we can take a look at what I mean by that by going to View, and we're going to go in View Transparency Grid. So you can see that the artboard in this case is just previewing in white, but the artboard is actually transparent. And what that means is if you print on white, those transparent, or if you're printing on white paper, those transparent color, or that the color of the paper is going to come through as white. But if you're printing on different colors, so if you're printing on like craft paper, or you're printing on foil, you're actually not going to get white. You're going to get whatever that paper color is. So it's something to like keep in mind when you're working on this. It could actually be really helpful if you're making like a design where you want to have that craft paper, you want to have foil come through. And in this case, we can use that knowledge kind of to our advantage in order to set up our file correctly so that we can print those lighter colors. So if I hide our transparency grid for a sec, I'm going to show you how I constructed this file. So we're going to need something called a knockout. So if we take a look, this is my layer here with my black background. And then above that layer, I've created a white knockout layer. Now, this is just how this particular printer wanted this set up. There's a different way that I'm gonna show you to create a knockout group, but in this case, the printer wanted it set up as a separate layer. So we've got our black background, and then we have a knockout layer. So if you imagine when this prints, all of this black ink is gonna print, leaving these spaces here in white. And I'm not just leaving spaces for the white elements, I'm also leaving those white spaces for my lighter ink colors. So my yellow, in order to ensure that it prints in my kind of like gold yellow color, needs to be printed on white. It needs to be printed on white paper. Otherwise, it's going to blend with the black underneath. So I've created this kind of knockout layer here so that all of this content that needs to be printed on top and is going to come through and be visible. We've got a comment here. Sometimes we see recycled paper with prints in white. How is that? I don't know the process for creating white recycled paper offhand. Are you talking about if you're like when you see craft paper printed in white? That is there. So there is white ink. I'm not saying that there's not such a thing as white ink. It's just highly specialized. And oftentimes when you see craft paper or things printed on like cardboard in white, it's actually not ink, it's actually like vinyl. So if you have like a vinyl cutter, like a Cricut machine, you can cut those vinyl decals and those get placed on. So, and Clarissa is saying, are you saying that the text is masked out? No, I'm just creating basically holes. These white areas are holes in my black ink. So the black ink is printing around those white areas, and those white areas are my paper. So it's not actually white, it can be any paper. It's just the paper that's underneath. I need to leave these spaces. I guess it's similar to like a mask that allows my other elements over top to be printed correctly. Let me know if that answers your question, Clarissa. Scrolling on through to make sure I haven't missed any questions. Okay, and I'm going to go through another example showing a knockout that maybe can help better explain this idea, kind of creating it from scratch. Carol's saying like it sounds like a registration challenge. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about things lining up and stuff like that in a second. So also don't forget, you can ask questions in our live chat, and if you're watching the replay, leave a comment. So I'm going to switch over for a sec to, this is actually, I use this die-line on another pro tips, but we're going to revisit it because it's actually quite handy. And it's a very simplified die-line, right? We're not looking at like the, the realities of using this as a die-line. We're just kind of using it as an example, and we're going to kind of build up our own packaging so that we can create a knockout group for a design. So we've got, I've removed basically all of the noise that is the template, and we're just kind of looking at a more simplified view, right? So maybe you're making some packaging here, and this is, we're going to create something from scratch. So to start, I'm actually going to grab something just from a library. If we go over to our libraries, I highly recommend that you store all of your brand assets and stuff like that to in a library, so it's easy to just kind of grab everything as you're working on this. So I'm gonna just navigate into the Art Squad brand. I think a couple of you in the chat might know about the Art Squad and the Illustrator Discord. Join our Illustrator Discord. We have a lot of fun. we're gonna hop over here, and you can see I have all of these little like brand assets and some colors. Keys is saying, I wonder why Jack didn't showcase the knockout masking feature in the previous pro tips episode, the one on masking. Well, we only have 30 minutes, so sometimes I have to make a sacrifice of like what we have time to cover. If we had an endless amount of time, I would show you an endless amount of things in Illustrator. So, or at least extend it to the limits of my knowledge. But yes, we're gonna look at knockouts here in a sec. So I'm just gonna drag in all of my logos here. I'm just gonna drag them all in. It's gonna let me kind of place them all over again in my, I made a very tiny one. I'm just gonna place these all in here from my library. I probably won't need all of these, but I like having them. Again, they're on my artboard, so you won't view them when these get saved out, right? And we're gonna embed these. The only kind of annoying thing about the assets from the library is we have to ungroup them. We also have to go up to Object. We need to release these clipping masks because it puts them all in a clipping mask, and which it makes them a little bit more tidy, but we're just gonna get rid of all those. So we're just working because I want to make some modifications to these. So if you were working with just like elements that you wanted to have linked to your library so you could update them and have them kind of update as you're working on your design, that would be one thing. But for today, we're going to be modifying them. All right, and then let's say we want to make like a pencil case. So, because I think that would be appropriate for the content that we're working on. I'm going to grab my all my shapes from my packaging. Oh, you know what we need to do? We need to add our colors to our design as well. All right, so I've added my brown swatches, so I want to show you this on a darker background. And you could alternate this, so we could make like the side panels of our pencil case be like this orange. But I want to have the main part the darker color because that's kind of the focus. And again, talking about like folding and stuff like that, sometimes, because I know this is going to come up, the glue edge, the printer will ask you to keep a portion of that white. So I'm just gonna leave that white. So just throwing some knowledge at you so that you know that sometimes you have to leave that glue area white in your design. Okay, so we've got that in there. I'm gonna grab my logo. So now when I'm placing things on some packaging, I want to think about like what are the most important elements that I need, and those are the things I'm gonna focus on adding first. So we want to add our logo. I'm going to add some text saying like what the product actually is. So we're going to say these are number 2 pencils. Very important. We're going to change this to be our brand color, which I happen to know, or our brand font, which I happen to know is Filson Soft, which is one of my favorite fonts. It's also an Adobe font, so feel free to use that. And then maybe we want to add these along the sides as well. So I'm going to copy and paste that text and change it to brown. Now, when putting things on different panels, something that's important to keep in mind is the legibility of the text. So when I am putting things on these panels, I'm thinking about when somebody rotates this box, making sure that the text is still legible. I want to make sure that, you know, when someone turns this, the text isn't accidentally upside down or something like that. So it's something to keep in mind. One thing to kind of help you start to visualize the spatial relationships of the box in like real space is to print this out, fold it, and then you can see like make sure that everything is lining up how you expect it to, and also make sure that all the elements the sizing is, you know, good. Or, you know, maybe something is too big or too small, or can you read it from a distance, all things you kind of have to consider. So make sure that you print it out at home, cut it up, fold it, and make sure that everything kind of lines up. So when, I don't know when getting that warning about multiple, should all be the same swatches. Anyways, when somebody rotates this, I want to make sure that when they turn on its side, they can read that number 2 pencil. So most important things, logo, who makes the product, what is the product, and then there's a couple other things you might want to make sure that you add, and you may not have those yet. So in those cases, I'll actually add what's called an FPO, or a for placement only object. So for placement only means I'm just using it for placement, for placeholder for the time being. So if there's going to be copy, if you've seen like lorem ipsum, that's kind of placeholder text. You can also have placeholder graphics. So if I drag out a shape over here, this is like the back panel of my box. I want to make sure that I have a space for my barcode, for example. Like maybe I don't have the barcode, but we're going to want to make sure that we account for it in our design, right, as we're kind of creating it. So I'll create these kind of for placement only elements. Yes, everybody's talking about the glue smearing the ink, so you don't want to have glue, or you don't want to have ink over the glue area. But do provide a bit of bleed in that area, though, yes. So, anyways, yes, yeah, I would add a bleed on this. This is just kind of like a demo. It's not like a real die line. I would have to do a little bit more work to add like the bleed and stuff, but you get the idea. Okay, so let's take a look at creating a knockout. So again, on this design, I'm going to open up a few panels for you. So we're going to open up our separations preview, and we're going to open up our attributes. So here is where you can see what your design is going to look like when it's overprinting. So if we set our design to be overprint, if we were to set this in white, again, like light colors, it's going to disappear over our darker color. So you shouldn't overprint white over things. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of demonstrate that for you. You'll see you'll even get like an error here that you can't overprint white because white is the absence of ink. Anyways, so I've got my design here. I'm going to make it back in my regular colors so you can see it. And first, I'm going to make my knockout. So I'm going to grab my image here, my logo, and I'm going to grab my background. So I've got the background selected, and I've got my logo selected. And I'm going to go over to my View Pathfinder, and I am going to just use minus front. And so I've copied my logo into my to my pasteboard, and I've used minus front to cut that out of the background shape. And then I can just paste in front my logo again. So I've got my logo there. Let me make sure that I've got everything on the same layer. Okay, I do. So I got my logo back on top. Now this is great. We've created our knockout with that, but we still kind of have a bit of an issue, which can happen sometimes, which I think is what Carol was talking about, which is the registration. So especially with screen printing, which is more of a manual process, you can have a little bit of slippage, and then you end up with the same problem that you have with like a bleed, where you have a little bit of the paper coming through. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to leave it there. And in this case, we need to set up trapping. So trapping is sometimes used with a knockout. So I'm going to use my background. I'm going to make my background a compound path. My logo, I'm going to make sure this is a compound path. I think it already is. And with my logo selected and my background selected, I can actually very easily, Illustrator makes it very easy for you to make a, to set up trapping once you've got your knockout set up. So I'm going to go to my Pathfinder again, and in the drop-down menu, I'm going to choose Trap. And I'm actually fine with the default settings, so that's fine. The thickness of 0.25 is fine. I'm going to hit OK, and now if I zoom in, you're going to see that it added this separate group that is like a barrier, so that if my text slips at all, I'm not going to end up having that strange white gap. So now we don't have a white gap on our text if we have any slippage. Oh my gosh, all of the everybody in the chat giving printer tips. Great to I love to see it. Michelle's saying the printer never asked me to knock out the background. They are always fine with the PDF. It depends on the style of printing that you're doing. This is a very niche kind of a thing. I just wanted to showcase it because it happens a lot with packaging in particular. So it's just kind of something to be aware of. Inks and shapes automatically knock out the ink shape underneath it. It depends on your printing. So I mentioned this is particularly important if you're doing screen printing. You have to make sure that you set up your knockout and your trapping. So it depends on the type of printing that you're going to be doing. If that helps all. Okay, so the final things I want to note before we run out of time are, in regards to printing, before you send this file off to the printer, and these are just kind of basic things, make sure you outline your fonts. So you want your fonts under type, create outlines. You want to have everything outlined. You want to have your brushes and expand any effects. You want to have everything kind of expanded and just down to flat shapes. So you should just have shapes, no brushes, nothing that could possibly default or disappear when you send it off to the printer. Printers have pre-press software that catches some errors, things that are like, too much ink and things like that. But sometimes if a font defaults, their pre-press software might not catch that because there's no real error. It's just... So anyways, all of this is just to make sure that like when you send things off to the printer, that you catch as many mistakes as you can before you send them all off. So it does look like our 30 minutes together is up. Time really does fly when you're having fun. Today was an overview of packaging, printing tips, print terms, a die line walkthrough, creating knockout and why to create one and when to use them, and a little bit of the overprint preview stuff. I mean, we don't have enough time to get into the overprint stuff in too much detail, but hopefully that was a good overview. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Today's Graphic Design Tuesday, which means there's going to be more graphic design live streams coming up after me, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everyone!